The Soviet woman who shot down a jet, the ace pilot. History tried to forget autumn 1942, the first encounter. The air base became a forge. The arrival of the German jets, even just as reconnaissance sightings, did two things. It poured the molten fear of the unknown into the hearts of the pilots and, simultaneously, hardened the resolve of the mechanics. The commander's briefing had been brief, the details sparse, but the implication was a cold knot in the stomach. The rules of engagement had changed. The labors of the hangar. The protagonist, whom the mechanics now simply called Liza in the familiar, gruff shorthand of the front line, spent the days not flying but meticulously inspecting her Yak-1, a machine she knew better than her own cramped billet. The maintenance crews were their own, separate breed of war-weary soldier. They didn't fly, but they held the pilot's lives in their wrench-scarred hands. Liza recognized that her survival depended on their exhausted diligence. In a greasy corner of the hangar, she and Grisha, the lead mechanic, a man with fingers permanently stained black and an uncanny ability to diagnose an engine fault by the color of its smoke, worked through the limits of the Yak. "It's a brick against a bullet, Devushka," Grisha rasped, wiping oil from his goggles. "You push her to 620, maybe 650 kilometers per hour in a dive, and the frame screams. She's an honest girl, but not a sprinter." Liza tapped the cowling near the radial engine. "We don't need to outrun it, Grisha. We need to outturn it. What is our critical maneuvering speed?" She showed him her notebook. Her cramped handwriting detailed the limits of the airframe, the maximum G-load it could sustain before the wings risked tearing apart. At standard combat weight, she knew the Yak could handle roughly 6.5 Gs before structural failure. "We'll be operating where the jet cannot," she said, tracing a tight, elegant turn on a scrap of paper. "They must fly fast. At high speed, their turn radius becomes enormous. We need to execute a high G, low-speed snap turn and be instantly ready to climb or dive." Grisha understood. She wasn't planning to run. She was planning to fight in a phone booth. In her notebook she wrote a single line: "The enemy's advantage is its cage." At high speed, the jet's ability to maneuver collapses. Its turn radius grows exponentially, while hers remains small and tight. Force the jet to slow down, or to overshoot. At 850 km per hour, the German jet could never match the 200-meter turn radius of her Yak at 400. Control is better. To achieve this, Liza asked Grisha for a few radical but subtle modifications. First, reduced ammunition. She cut her cannon and machine gun rounds by 20% to shave off weight, trusting her aim to make up the difference. Second, trim fine-tuning. The control surfaces, especially the rudder and elevator tabs, were adjusted to be hyper-responsive, requiring less stick movement but demanding far greater precision. A twitch too far would send the plane into a fatal spin. Third, fuel management. She would carry only the minimum fuel needed for each mission, always balancing range against the precious advantage of lightness. These weren't upgrades, they were calculated risks. Every screw turned closer to the edge of performance. The mathematics of dread. The first time she encountered one, it wasn't a fight. It was a ghost. The mission was a high-altitude patrol near a critical railway junction. The sky was an empty, brittle blue. Liza was flying in the number 2 position, tucked under the wing of her flight leader, Captain Dmitry Volkov, a veteran with a patchy gray scarf and a history of never panicking. "Control, this is Falcon 1, Volkov's voice crackled through the static, tight with tension. "I have a high-altitude contrail. It's moving too fast." Liza scanned the eastern sky. A thin, ruler-straight white line cut the blue like a scratch on glass, miles high. It wasn't the billowing curve of a piston-engine plane. It was thin, precise, and endless. The aircraft itself was invisible, a glint of metal that could have been a trick of the light, but the line it left was a trail of doom. "Falcon 2, adjust heading 15 degrees starboard," Volkov ordered, his voice a low rumble. "We are not engaging. Repeat, do not engage. Stay under the contrail. Let's see how much fuel it's willing to burn to scout us." For 5 minutes, they flew parallel to the silent, invisible threat. It was a terrifying asymmetry. Their slow, honest engines hammered away, making them visible, audible targets. The jet above them was a silent scythe. Liza felt a cold sweat under her helmet. Her hands locked on the stick. Then, suddenly, the contrail snapped to a 90-degree turn, and vanished. The jet had simply throttled up and disappeared beyond the horizon in seconds. Volkov broke the silence. The speed, the acceleration, it defies belief. If it had been a Messerschmitt, we'd have seen its wings, its exhaust. This a phantom. Back at the base, the encounter changed everything. The pilots drank heavily and nervously. The old laws of the air, the dogfight, the climb, the dive, all seemed to evaporate in the face of this new speed. But Liza saw an equation. The jet's velocity was far greater than the yak's. But its fuel burn rate was also far higher. The faster it flew, the shorter it lived. The jet could stay on the attack for minutes. Her yak could circle for hours. Her conclusion was simple: patience is a weapon. Force the jet to waste its fuel on high-speed passes and desperate climbs. Never give it a clean target. Make it chase ghosts until its tanks are empty and it's forced to slow, land, or run. The battle must be fought during the jet's transition phase, the moment between speed and survival, when it has to act like the old machines it was built to replace. The hunter becomes the bait. A week later, the jets returned, not for reconnaissance this time, but for a strike. It was a moonless night, the kind that swallows both sound and light. Liza was on patrol, guarding a freshly stocked rail yard. The warning didn't come from the radio. It came from the ground, a sudden, deep, bass whoosh that wasn't an engine, but the tearing of the air itself. Then the distant rattle of anti-aircraft guns firing at ghosts. Falcon 2, hostile 2 kilometers southwest, high speed. Volkov's shout was ragged. They hit the fuel depot. Brake and climb. Liza did the opposite. She shoved the stick forward, dropped her nose, and dove for the deck, skimming treetops. Climbing was suicide against a jet. You only made yourself a fixed target. The jet, a dark silhouette that swallowed the stars, flashed past 500 meters above, a black streak. It didn't even see her. The German pilot was focused on the burning depot below. Liza's breathing went shallow. The raw speed of the German aircraft made her feel like she was floating in a pond while a motorboat tore past. She pulled up and banked, leveling out just above the ground. She'd seen its path. To strike again, the jet would need to turn, a wide, sweeping arc dictated by its own momentum. Control is better. She positioned herself directly under its predicted turn, like a patient spider waiting under the thread. Volkov, I have him. He's turning east, 400 meters up. I'm going in slow and low, she radioed, calm amid the chaos. The next moments blurred into instinct. Liza forced her yak into a sustained, high G turn, the engine screaming, the frame protesting just below its limits. She stayed in that narrow, low-speed pocket where her aircraft could dance and the jet could not. The German came around for his second pass, committed to his attack profile. He had speed, but no control. He was trapped by his own design. Liza yanked her yak into a violent 6G snap turn, placing herself behind the jet as it straightened out for the bombing run. The distance was too great, but it was the only place she could be, right in its blind spot. She fired. A short, tight burst, 1.5 seconds of cannon fire. The tracers fell short. The jet pilot, alerted by the flashes, jettisoned his bombs and accelerated away. He didn't fight. He fled. Liza watched the black shape vanish into the horizon, a streak of metal dissolving into dawn. She landed, body trembling, throat dry, the smell of cordite and oil thick in the cockpit. She hadn't killed it, but she'd made it run. Falcon 2 reporting, she said, voice steady despite exhaustion. Hostile disengaged. Target area intact. Returning to base. In her notebook, beneath a smear of oil and graphite, she wrote, confirmed theory, the jet cannot fight in close quarters. It depends on hit-and-run tactics. To defeat it, the propeller fighter must become negative energy, slow, tight, and unpredictable, forcing the jet to spend its speed on fuel it cannot use to aim. The cost of missing its target is too high. It will not linger. She had survived the first encounter, and proven her hypothesis. Now the real work would begin, teaching the old ways to defeat the new terror. Part 3, The Doctrine of the Sweet Spot, late autumn 1942, training the regiment. The smell of burnt oil and fear clung to the 586th like the winter damp. Liza's encounter, the non-kill that saved the rail yard, had not brought celebration, but fierce debate. Captain Volkov, a man of rigid discipline, was furious. You disobeyed my order, Falcon 2. He shouted in the cramped briefing room. You were told to climb and maintain energy. You dove to the deck instead. That's a ground attack maneuver, not an interception. Liza stood stiffly, her face smudged with carbon. She held her small, grease-stained notebook not as a defense but as evidence. "Captain," she said quietly, "doctrine is written for the machines it describes. That enemy aircraft, the one that leaves a straight line in the sky, does not obey our doctrine. It's too fast." She walked to the blackboard and drew a quick diagram, a wide curve representing the massive turn of a high-speed jet, and a tight knot for the yak's compact maneuver. "When we climb, we place ourselves directly in its path," she explained. "It keeps its speed, fires, and disappears before we can even aim. But when I dove, I forced it to ignore me. When I pulled up into a tight turn, I made it fight in my domain, low speed, high control. The sweet spot of the yak." She tapped the smaller circle. "Control is better than speed," she said. "I forced the Phantom to choose between burning all its fuel to chase me, or abandoning the attack. It chose to run." Volkov stared at the chalk lines, his anger fading into a reluctant understanding. Every pilot who had tried to meet the jet head-on had failed. The old rules no longer applied. 3 days later, senior command arrived, stern men with medals and paperwork, not flight hours. "Pilot Liza," said Major Korolyov, flipping through her report. "Your actions are noted. But your idea of negative energy defense contradicts standard air combat doctrine. We must match the enemy's speed to achieve a firing solution." "Sir," Liza replied calmly, "we cannot match its speed. We must match its lack of control. Our yak, at lower speed, can turn within a few hundred meters. The new bird, at double the speed, needs over a kilometer. If we force it to slow down, it becomes unstable and burns through its efficiency. We fight not against velocity, but against time." The officers exchanged doubtful glances. Still, with the growing losses on the front, they had no better ideas. They gave her permission to train a small group, 3 pilots, the best maneuverists in the regiment. Liza called the training exercise the mouse trap. She used the fastest plane available, a captured Messerschmitt 109, flown by a daring pilot named Petya. His job was simple: simulate the jet by flying straight, fast, and predictable. Liza, in her yak, would be the defender. The test was merciless. When Petya dove at full speed toward her, Liza would cut the throttle, deploy a flap for instant lift, and yank into a brutal high G reversal, turning so tight and fast it almost blacked her out. Instead of running, she crossed his path in the shortest possible time. By the time Petya pulled up from his dive and tried to turn, Liza had already climbed behind him, using the leftover momentum from her reversal. The faster aircraft simply couldn't turn tightly enough to follow. Petya's wide turns left him vulnerable every time. He could never bring his guns to bear. Liza wrote her new maxim on the blackboard. Never fly a straight line. Never maintain a constant speed. The enemy calculates a simple path. Make your path unpredictable. The younger pilots struggled at first. The turns were violent, the forces crushing. Some blacked out, others vomited into their oxygen masks. They were trained to value speed and altitude. Liza was teaching them to value position and timing. Boris, one of the quieter pilots, understood first. Wiping blood from his nose after a sharp turn, he said, "It's like dodging a charging bull. You don't try to outrun it, you step aside at the last second, then strike where it can't see you." By the end of the week, her small team could consistently outmaneuver Petya's mock attacks. They weren't faster, but they were smarter. Major Korolyov watched the final exercise through binoculars. He saw Liza's yak dancing on the edge of a stall, her wings trembling but holding, while Petya's faster plane struggled to keep up. When it was over, he closed his notebook with a long sigh. "Pilot Liza," he said during the debriefing, his tone softer now. "The General Staff has been informed of your unusual success. They require a detailed report on your methods. Effective immediately, you and the 3 pilots you trained, along with Captain Volkov, are to form a special interception flight. You will lead it." Liza froze. She hadn't wanted command. Command meant exposure, reports, attention, responsibility. Success meant visibility, and visibility could be fatal. Still, the order was sealed and signed by a general. She was no longer an anonymous pilot. She was now the face of an experiment that worked. Korolyov's voice turned low and serious. "Your unit will be transferred to a new sector. Intelligence confirms that the enemy's fast aircraft are targeting our long-range bombers. The threat is constant now. You are the first and last line of defense. Godspeed, Lieutenant. The next morning, Liza and her small team packed their yaks with minimal supplies, spare fuel, and the notebook that had changed everything. They took off into the cold horizon, toward the sector where the phantoms hunted daily. The war had just become personal. And the mathematics of survival had become the new doctrine of air combat. The gray, thunderless splash in the sea was not the end of the velocity-driven machine, it was the beginning of a political storm. The wreckage was quickly salvaged, fragments hauled onto a barge and delivered to a secure depot. The angular airframe, the thin turbine blades, the streamlined intake, all became objects of intense scrutiny. But the greatest change was the sudden, blinding scrutiny directed at the pilot who had brought it down. The bureaucratic swarm. 2 days after the engagement, the aerodrome, which had previously smelled only of oil and fear, suddenly reeked of expensive cologne and paper. A stream of high-ranking staff arrived. There were intelligence officers, thin men with cold eyes who spoke in clipped whispers, demanding to know the exact angle of attack she used. There were propagandists, loud, cheerful women who saw her achievement as a canvas for morale, demanding heroic quotes and a staged photograph with her aircraft, cleaned and polished. Liza, still known only by her callsign Falcon 2 outside her immediate flight, found the attention suffocating. She preferred the clean, honest dialogue of mechanics and mathematics to the slippery, embellished prose of command. Major Korolyov, her former skeptical superior, was now her chief handler, navigating the bureaucracy like a wary ship captain. They need a hero, pilot, he muttered, pulling her aside near a stack of leaking oil drums. The losses have been heavy. Morale is grim. That new high-speed fighter is an existential crisis for the Air Force. You are the proof it can be defeated. You are a weapon of morale now. She pushed back. Sir, I don't need a spectacle. I need 5 more minutes with Grisha to adjust the cannon feed. I need to know why the enemy pilot committed to that turn when his speed made it impossible. I need the science, not the story. Her notebook, filled with cramped script, calculations on burst lengths and lag times, was confiscated by intelligence. They treated it as if it were a coded document. Excerpt from intelligence report, highly classified. The pilot, code designation, Falcon 2, utilized a calculated energy deficit maneuver, allowing the enemy's superior speed to carry it past her firing line, then striking at the apex of its deceleration. This represents a reversal of established doctrine. Recommended. Immediate dissemination of the tactic. High propaganda value. The pressure of perfection. The pressure on Liza became unbearable. She was reassigned from simple patrol to special intercept status. Her team expanded into a full squadron, 9 fighters, all expected to learn and execute her new doctrine, now called the mousetrap. But it wasn't a simple trick. It was part science, part intuition, part nerve. It required pilots to fly their planes right to the edge of a stall, to pull bone-crushing G-forces, and to possess the delicate touch of a clockmaker on the controls. Captain Volkov, now her reluctant but loyal wingman, struggled with the idea. It feels wrong, Liza, he admitted one evening as they watched the ground crews working under harsh lamps. Flying slow to kill something fast. It goes against everything we've been taught. It's only physics, Dmitri, she replied, cleaning her goggles. Their engine is built for straight-line power, not for tight, sudden turns. Our yak is a dancer. We fight where they are weak, in the curve, not the chase. Liza began teaching through analogy. She drew on the chalkboard, showing that the enemy's turn radius was enormous compared to theirs. If they could pull the fight into the narrow zone between a tight turn and a long one, the zone where the faster machine could not follow, they could trap it, force panic, and strike. The propagandist's narrative. The worst pressure came from the propagandists. They needed a hero, and Liza was chosen. She was given a brand new, polished fighter, which she immediately disliked, preferring her battered, tuned original. The newspaper headline screamed, "The Air Phantom Slayer." They invented a backstory, daughter of a factory worker and a scientist, the perfect worker soldier. They demanded she take a catchy nickname. She refused. I am Pilot Liza, she told the chief propagandist, a woman named Elena with bright red lipstick. I am a fighter. I am not a story. Elena smiled politely. But the people need this. They must see that our willpower and ingenuity can defeat the enemy's technology. You will be a symbol. Liza finally agreed to one official portrait, but only if Grisha, the lead mechanic, stood beside her, holding a wrench. The victory belongs to the aircraft and the man who maintains it, she said firmly. Without his hands, the plane fails. Without science, I am just a target. The victory is not mine, it belongs to truth. Elena realized she couldn't change her. So she turned the technical into myth, the genius pilot who used the enemy's speed against them. The story spread. Morale soared. But it had an unintended consequence, it told the enemy everything they needed to know. Now, every opposing pilot would be briefed. The Phantom would not fall for the same trick again. Liza understood. By being noticed, she had painted a target on her own wings. Her private note, written deep in her confiscated journal, burned in her mind. Speed is good. Control is better. Now she was fighting not just the enemy, but the weight of fame. And the certainty that her next battle would be against someone trained to hunt her. The quiet containment was worse than the fighting. Liza, still Falcon 2 to her regiment, was officially rewarded but unofficially silenced. Her promotion came with an unspoken message: you proved our theory. Now don't cause any more trouble. The special interception flight stayed small. Its missions were limited to defense, not the aggressive hunts she wanted. Liza resented the idleness, the clean smell of her new, protected, hangar. She craved the raw, honest noise of combat. The silence meant something far worse: the enemy was studying her victory, and preparing their answer. The enemy adapts. The countermeasure did not come as an ambush. It came as a change, a subtle, terrifying shift in how the enemy flew. The high-velocity fighters, those angular machines that carved straight lines across the sky, began to fly higher. They climbed to altitudes where the yak struggled, where the air was thin, the engine gasped for oxygen, and every control movement felt heavy and delayed. The first patrol confirmed her fears. They spotted two of the fast enemy fighters scouting a troop convoy. Liza tried her trusted maneuver, cutting throttle, pulling hard, forcing an overshoot. But this time, the enemy didn't fall for it. Instead of turning wide and diving, the lead aircraft banked upward into a shallow climb, trading speed for height. It hovered above them, untouchable, too fast to catch, too high to reach. They've been briefed, Liza, Volkov's voice crackled over the radio. They know your trick. They won't come down to play. The enemy had learned. The first kill had not just cost them a pilot, it had taught them a lesson in physics. In her notebook, under the heading Tactical Failure, Liza wrote, "The enemy avoids low-speed combat. They stay above our ceiling and beyond our reach. The doctrine is obsolete. The question is, how do I force them down?" The new calculus, compression and convection. The new strategy meant starting over. This time, the battle would not happen low. It would happen in the unstable middle, the place where both machines began to falter. Liza focused on the weaknesses of the enemy's design. First, airframe heating. At extreme speeds, air compresses and burns against the surface, stressing the metal and the systems within. Second, the engine intake. That sleek machine needs a perfect, steady flow of air. If that airflow is disturbed by turbulence, a sudden change in pressure, or a steep turn, the engine can choke and die. Liza turned to the base's weather officer, an elderly woman named Clara, quiet and sharp as a scalpel. "Clara," she asked, pointing at a pressure chart. "When the ground is cold but the air above is warmer, where is the most unstable layer?" Clara studied the chart and tapped a point just above the cloud tops. "There," she said softly. "That's where the air fights itself. Warm and cold currents collide. It's chaos. Hell for a wing." Liza smiled faintly. That was exactly what she needed, chaos. Her plan was a trap made of weather and physics. The idea was simple but deadly: lure the enemy into a layer of turbulent air where their speed would turn against them. The thermal trap. Working with her mechanic Grisha, Liza prepared the yak for its most dangerous flight yet. They stripped away all unnecessary weight, paint, armor, even fuel was reduced to the bare minimum. They modified the engine to allow a risky, manually enriched fuel mix, dangerous but enough to squeeze a few more meters of altitude. Her new doctrine was radical. Fly into the turbulent shear layer. Let the air itself become a weapon. The theory was elegant. If the enemy fighter entered the unstable air at full speed, its engine would choke on the distorted airflow. It would lose power, even stall. The slower, sturdier yak, though shaking and gasping, could survive. The decoy and the gambit. The chance came during a massive daylight raid on a rail hub. 3 of the fast enemy aircraft circled high above the clouds like hawks, waiting. Liza led her small flight, 4 yaks, in a loose box formation. They ignored the chaos below and climbed steadily, higher and higher, until the air began to bite. Falcon leader to control, she radioed through the mask. We're approaching 8,000 meters. Expect severe turbulence. Volkov, flying on her wing, sounded tense. Liza, the wings are icing. We can't hold this height. Hold steady, Dmitri, she ordered. We are the bait. They must think we're desperate. The 4 yaks flew into the chaotic air, a zone of violent updrafts and sudden drops. The enemy, confident and curious, descended slightly to watch the spectacle. Then they entered the same unstable layer. Liza saw it happen, a tremor in the sky. The lead enemy fighter began to wobble. Its straight, perfect flight turned erratic. The powerful airflow that kept its engine alive was suddenly disrupted. It shuddered, choked, and dipped its nose. A flame flickered from its tail. The pilot pushed down hard, diving to regain control, abandoning his altitude, his one great advantage. Dive. Dive now. Liza into the radio. They're dropping into our box. Full power, hard turn to intercept. Her yak plunged through the clouds. The engine screamed but held. Below, the once mighty enemy fighter was falling fast, struggling to recover speed. Liza closed in. Her training, the equations, the instincts, into one perfect shot. She fired a short, controlled burst. The rounds struck near the engine. A blinding flash, the enemy's power plant tearing itself apart. The aircraft rolled, then tumbled, trailing smoke, until gravity claimed it completely. Liza pulled up sharply, breath ragged, oil smoke filling her cockpit. The thermal trap had worked. The sky was quiet again. Human understanding, the marriage of courage and physics, had defeated the machine built for speed. This was the critical moment. The pilot had abandoned altitude and speed to regain engine stability, dropping the high-velocity fighter directly into the low-energy envelope where the yak was dominant. Dive. Dive now. Liza into the radio. They are forced into our box. Full throttle, maximum turn to the intercept. Liza plunged her yak out of the turbulent cloud layer, chasing the wounded angular aircraft. The yak's engine screamed under the stress of the manual over-rich mixture, but it responded. The tables had turned. The high-velocity machine, designed to fly fast and clean, was now struggling, heavy, and desperately trying to build speed in an energy-draining dive. Liza was on its tail in seconds. The calculation was instantaneous and beautiful. The target's velocity was falling rapidly. The firing solution was perfect. She applied the training she had given her men, anticipating the lag, leading the target's trajectory. She released a measured, surgical burst. The rounds ripped into the rear fuselage near the engine nozzle. A massive flare of white-hot exhaust, a sign of total engine failure, erupted from the back of the velocity-driven fighter. It pitched violently, spinning out of control, reduced once again to a heavy, falling stone obeying only the laws of gravity. Liza pulled away, panting, the smell of burnt oil thick in her cockpit. The thermal trap had worked. The human hand, aided by knowledge of physics, had defeated the untouchable speed of the machine. Part 6, The Inevitable Duel. Late spring 1944, the trap springs. Liza's success with the thermal trap was the final straw for the enemy's high command. The technical reports flowing back to Berlin could no longer dismiss the kills as mechanical failures or luck. A specific counter-tactic, a doctrine of physics, was being deployed successfully by a single pilot, and that pilot had to be eliminated. The response was not another strike mission, it was a targeted hunt. The hunter becomes the hunted. The commander of the German unit operating the high-velocity fighters was an aristocratic man named Major von Kessel, a pilot who saw the angular machines as the logical evolution of air combat. Von Kessel viewed Liza's tactics not as bravery, but as a technical insult. He had studied the combat reports, analyzing the altitude, weather data, and the precise timing of the engine failure. He deduced that the thermal trap was a one-time maneuver, utterly reliant on specific atmospheric conditions. He formulated a plan to force a fight in clear skies, where speed and altitude would be absolute. Von Kessel's order was simple: lure Falcon 2 out, isolate her, and engage only one-on-one. The enemy began flying single, aggressive patrols. A single angular aircraft would streak across the front line, maintaining an altitude just above the Yak's maximum effective ceiling, making wide, provocative turns, then diving away before any interception force could gather. They were seeking a response from the special interception flight. Liza saw the pattern immediately. "It's a boast, Dmitri," she told Volkov. "They are saying, you beat 3 of us in the clouds. Now try 1 of us in the clear air. They are hunting me." Volkov argued against flying. "This is not war, Liza. It is a duel. Command told you to conserve your aircraft." Command did not calculate the political cost of not responding, she countered, strapping into her cockpit. "If we ignore this, the myth of the new bird returns. The other squadrons will lose faith. We have to show that the physics still apply, even when the enemy controls the parameters." The duel over the river line. Liza took off alone, trusting only in the meticulous adjustments Grisha had made to her Yak. She climbed steadily, letting the solitary high-velocity fighter establish its position. It was a clear, bitter cold day. The air was smooth, no sheer layers, no useful turbulence. The fight would be a raw test of machine versus mind. The angular aircraft was easily visible, a silver dart carving arcs at over 8,000 meters. Falcon leader to Phantom, Liza radioed, using a deliberately provocative, unofficial call sign. "You are entering my patrol zone. Descend and engage." Von Kessel, hearing the crisp, calm female voice, smirked. He acknowledged only with a high G turn, dropping his nose slightly to accelerate to terrifying speed, 850 km per hour, a velocity that stressed his airframe but gave him massive kinetic energy. The first pass, energy management. Von Kessel dove straight at Liza, a thunderous streak from the sun. Liza held her course until the last possible second, then pulled the stick violently sideways, not into a climb or a dive, but a barrel roll brake. It was an instantaneous, high-G maneuver designed to disrupt the enemy's firing solution by changing her vector completely, rather than her speed. The angular aircraft flashed past her, its wake buffeting the smaller Yak violently. The German pilot fired a long, desperate burst that scattered harmlessly behind her. Von Kessel, now moving 300 km per hour faster than the Yak, had to commit to a wide, gentle climb to regain altitude and reposition. Liza had done what she intended. She forced him into a massive energy exchange, trading his speed for the opportunity to climb back up. The second pass, the momentum trap. Von Kessel was disciplined. He didn't chase. He used his superior climb rate to regain altitude and came in again, this time from below. He tried to force Liza to bleed off speed in a dive. Liza refused the dive. She went into a vertical scissors maneuver, flying slow, almost hovering, using her propeller's torque to pivot the Yak on its axis. She was flying dangerously close to a stall, but it kept her inside the angular aircraft's massive turn radius. Von Kessel was forced to make a choice: engage the slow, unstable Yak, or overshoot and run. He chose the former, believing he could use a momentary burst of speed to close the distance. He slowed his throttle to commit to a turning fight, the one thing his design hated. The climax, the point of no return. As Von Kessel reduced speed, Liza exploited the moment of maximum instability. His aircraft's controls grew sluggish. She pulled a snap roll that placed her Yak directly in front of his nose for a split second, a suicidal maneuver. Von Kessel panicked and pulled up hard to avoid collision. This sudden, sharp high-G pull at a non-optimal speed was the mistake Liza had been waiting for. The controls on the high-velocity aircraft froze under the strain of the rapid load shift, a design flaw at the edge of the flight envelope. Liza reversed her turn instantly, using the momentum and the Yak's low-speed control to swing onto his now stuttering tail. She was barely 100 meters away, so close she could see the strain on the German pilot's canopy. She delivered a short, sharp burst of cannon fire, the final mathematical solution. She hit the leading edge of the wing near the fuel tank. The resulting explosion was massive, a blinding orange flash that tore the angular aircraft in half. The forward section tumbled down, the rear section trailing flame and smoke, falling in 2 distinct pieces into the frozen forests below. Liza flew home in a shuddering machine, her body bruised, her adrenaline spent. The duel was over. She had defeated their best pilot, not through superior technology, but through superior understanding of the physics of flight. She had proven that control is better than speed, even when the speed differential was insurmountable. The immediate reckoning. Liza landed to a shocked silence that quickly gave way to a roar of mechanics and pilots. They had seen the engagement from the ground, the dance of the tiny, slow fighter against the monstrous speed of the angular aircraft. The victory was undeniable, but the cost was high. The combat was so extreme, so reliant on exploiting the structural limits of the Yak, that command could not afford to risk her again. Her aircraft was battered, her body was bruised. Major Korolyov met her on the tarmac, his face pale. "Pilot," he said, his voice flat. "Your combat days are over. You are too valuable. You will be reassigned immediately to the Central Flight Training Institute. You will write the new doctrine. You will teach others to do what you have done. You are promoted to major. Your war in the air is done." It was a final, complete containment. The promotion was a gilded cage. She would be safe, rewarded, and silenced, her singular genius absorbed into the collective, sanitized truth of military doctrine. Her private war of physics against technology had become public dogma. Part 7, Doctrine and Silence, Summer 1945, The Training Institute. Liza's new life was defined by the stillness of the Central Flight Training Institute, a world away from the mud and noise of the front. She was Major Liza, a title that felt heavy and ill-fitting. Her new uniform was clean and pressed, her hands were startlingly free of grease. Her job was to distill the chaotic reality of her combat into clean, digestible doctrine. She was given a large office, a quiet assistant, and a mission: codify the victory over the angular aircraft so that it could be taught to every pilot entering the force. The problem of translation. The greatest challenge was not remembering what she did, but translating instinct into instruction. How do you teach a pilot to trust the edge of a stall? How do you teach the precise, almost maternal feel for the engine at maximum strain? She started with principles. Her blackboard was filled not with battle plans, but with diagrams illustrating the relationship between turning radius and velocity. She showed them that the Yak's turn radius was geometrically smaller than the angular aircraft's turn radius by the square of their velocity difference. The only logical place to fight was in the low velocity band. She coined the term, tactical energy deficit, the deliberate act of forcing one's own aircraft into a lower energy state than the enemy's, thereby maximizing maneuverability and minimizing the enemy's ability to maintain a stable firing solution. But the young pilots, fresh from basic training, struggled. They respected the major, but they feared the doctrine. It flew in the face of everything they were taught: speed is survival. Altitude is advantage. "Major," one young pilot, Lieutenant Yevgeny, asked cautiously during a theory session. "You teach us to dive to escape speed, but then to slow the throttle to turn. Doesn't that make us a sitting duck?" Liza placed a small model of the Yak on the desk. "It makes you a target, Lieutenant, if you fly straight. But a sitting duck can spin, roll, and pivot. A speeding hawk cannot. You are trading speed for control. Control is better. We are forcing the angular aircraft to waste its greatest asset, fuel, on the impossible task of chasing a mosquito in a bottle." She insisted on practical exercises, using slower aircraft to simulate the high-velocity threat. She taught them to look not at the aircraft, but at the air surrounding the wings, the small, sudden signs of compression and turbulence that betrayed an enemy pilot's intent moments before their machine could respond. The personal cost. The official promotion in safety came with a profound loneliness. At the institute, she was not one of the pilots, she was an icon, a major. The bureaucracy protected her from the danger of the sky, but left her exposed to the slow erosion of memory. The paperwork arrived regularly, formal queries from Moscow requesting revisions to her language, toning down the emphasis on individual intuition and shifting credit back toward regimental innovation and Soviet scientific superiority. Her name was increasingly redacted from the final, published doctrine. Her victory became a technical process, a formula, separated from the person who invented it. This was the silent erasure foreseen in the early days. She kept flying, not in combat, but in testing. She took the new, heavier fighters up, pushing them to their breaking point to find the new sweet spot for the next generation. She flew to remember the feel of the machine, the honest dialogue between pilot and metal. These solitary flights became her private memorial to the pilots who failed and the principles she discovered. When the war finally ended, not with a whimper, but with the massive, grinding exhaustion of an empire, Liza was still at the institute. The news arrived via a frantic radio message, not a cheering crowd. Her immediate reaction was to walk out to the empty runway, climb into an old Yak-3, and just sit there for an hour, engine off, letting the silence of the ceasefire wash over her. She had defeated the technical terror of the enemy, codified the counter-doctrine, and survived the war. She was a hero, contained, preserved, and simplified. Her combat memory was now a series of footnotes in a manual that would be taught for decades. She was ready for the next, equally difficult battle, the fight for her own memory.